I never imagined that the day that would shake me the most wasn't the day I faced fire, wasn't the day I carried Captain Harold Whitman out of a collapsing warehouse, wasn't even the day I fell in my own garage and realized age had finally caught up to me. It was Christmas Eve, 2024, a night when a 72-year-old father should be surrounded by laughter, cutting into a turkey, listening to Silent Night playing from the old radio my wife used to love. Instead, my only son placed a decision on the table, a decision he and his wife had planned for weeks, and he delivered it like it was a kindness. My name is Douglas Kane. For half my life I was a firefighter, the man who ran into burning buildings while everyone else ran the other way, the man who dragged strangers and brothers in arms out of hell, the man who understood what it meant to keep a promise. But that night, I couldn't even hold on to my own home. Ryan looked at me across the candlelight and smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they're about to say something you won't like. "Dad, we already arranged a room for you at Maplewood Veterans Home." My breath paused. Then came the second line, the one that fell colder than the snow piling up outside. "You'll be fine there." And Lisa, my daughter-in-law, the woman who always spoke in a voice soft as feathers but sharp as a blade. "It's safer for everyone, Dad. We already made the decision. They had decided, and I was simply informed. They thought I was too old to catch the shift in tone, but I've heard desperate men right before the fire closed in on them, and that night I heard that same tone from my own son. What they didn't know was this. Behind my shaky hands, my old cabin, my chipped coffee cup, and my tiny firefighter pension, I was hiding something Ryan never saw coming. A secret tied to the death of Captain Harold Whitman, the man I pulled out of a chemical inferno back in 1998. A secret buried inside his will. A legacy I never revealed to anyone, not even my son. A secret powerful enough to turn Maplewood upside down, protect every forgotten veteran living inside it, and eventually force the same son who put me in a nursing home to look me in the eye and whisper the words, "I'm sorry." But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We share new stories every single day. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. I'm Douglas, a father, a retired firefighter, and a man who learned the hardest lesson of his life on that Christmas night. Children aren't always family. And to understand how far I fell, and how I climbed back up, I need to take you back to the beginning. My little wooden house stood on the edge of Cleveland. That night, snow weighed down the pine tree in my yard until the branches drooped. Inside, I had wrapped warm yellow lights around the windows, turned on the old gas fireplace, and set out the deep red tablecloth my wife used every Christmas. The smell of roasted turkey mixed with the cinnamon candle burning on the counter. The soft light glowed on a framed picture of Ellen, my wife gone for more than a decade. And like every Christmas for the past 30 years, I performed one ritual. I polished my firefighter helmet, number 47. I used to tell Ryan when he was little, this helmet isn't for showing off. It's to remember the ones we didn't save. That night, after setting it back on the shelf, Ryan and Lisa walked in. Lisa gave me a polite hug, colder than the wind blowing across my porch. Ryan sat down, unfolded his napkin, and smiled, the practiced smile of a man preparing to deliver bad news. Dinner began with small talk. Lisa rambling about a new coworker, Ryan summarizing a corporate project, and me nodding along with a smile no one noticed was trembling. Then, right as I reached for a bit more gravy, clink. Ryan laid his knife and fork down. I knew that sound. I'd heard it from doctors preparing to tell a family their loved one didn't survive a fire. He spoke, "Dad, we already arranged a room for you at Maplewood Veterans Home, starting next week." I thought I'd misheard him. I asked again. He didn't blink. Lisa smiled, confident, composed, rehearsed. "It's safer for everyone. You'll get better care there. Safer for everyone." Those words cut deeper than any flame. Not safer for me. Safer for them. Their comfort. Their convenience. Their plans. Their claim to everything I owned. As they spoke, a memory struck me, metal collapsing, heat blasting my face. Harold lying half-conscious in a corner covered in chemical dust. I carried him out of the fire that day. I did what a man must do. I kept my oath. But this Christmas night, I could only watch as my own family tore apart everything I had spent my life protecting. I excused myself and stepped out to the porch. The wind slapped my face, carrying the smell of snow and distant chimney smoke. I gripped the railing, trying to steady my breath. And then I heard his voice behind me. Ryan. Talking on the phone. Yeah, paperwork's done. I just need his signature on the transfer form. We'll sell the house before spring. My blood turned to ice. Not from the snow. From the truth. My Christmas dinner wasn't a family gathering. It was a board meeting, a meeting about transferring assets. And I, a man who once ran into fire to save strangers, was being pushed out of my own home by the very son I raised. I sat in the passenger seat while Ryan's SUV turned onto the snow-covered road leading to Maplewood Veterans Home. Outside the window, the pine trees stood heavy with snow, silent witnesses to something I never thought I'd live to experience. I had driven out to save people for more than 30 years. Yet here I was. Not the rescuer anymore, but the one being delivered. Ryan didn't play music, didn't talk, didn't look at me, didn't ask if I was cold, didn't ask if I wanted to go back home to grab an extra sweater, didn't ask me a single thing. That feeling, that hollow, sinking feeling, was one I never expected to taste in this lifetime, being treated by your own child like something to be transferred. Finally, the car came to a stop. Ryan lifted my bag from the trunk and placed it on the wet concrete. He didn't offer an arm, didn't help me out, didn't walk me to the door. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, and said in that firm, practiced voice someone uses to justify a decision they made weeks ago, "Dad, this is the right thing. They'll take better care of you than I can." I looked at him. Words wouldn't have helped. There are pains too deep for language. Just one look is enough. Ryan gave a small nod as if he'd completed a task on a checklist. Then he got back in the SUV. The wheels rolled away, leaving deep marks in the snow, and I stood there alone with an old suitcase and a breath that felt longer than my entire lifetime. From a distance, Maplewood didn't look terrible. A red brick building, Christmas lights hanging unevenly across the porch, a cheap-leaning Christmas tree by the entrance, a taped-up Happy Holidays sign fluttering in the wind. But when the automatic doors opened, I knew immediately this was not a place for living. The smell of bleach hit me so hard it stung my eyes. The hallway stretched long and narrow, the ceiling low, the fluorescent lights flickering a sickly green that made everyone look like they were halfway to becoming ghosts. An old man in a wheelchair stared out a window, eyes empty like he'd been waiting for something that never arrived. No laughter, no conversation, no warmth. This wasn't a home. It was a storage facility for people society no longer wanted to see. A staff member led me to room 12B, your room. It looked like a temporary holding cell. A metal-framed bed with peeling paint. A mattress so thin I could already feel the bars underneath. A drafty window with a gap where the wind hissed through. A fluorescent light flickering 2-3 times a minute. A warped wooden table, the kind that looked like it had survived a fight. I took a deep breath. I've stood in houses half-eaten by fire, crawled through collapsing attics, run through black smoke so thick you could chew it. But something about the stale mix of bleach, dampness, and abandonment inside Maplewood chilled me in a way fire never did. I was unpacking a few small belongings when I heard a woman's voice behind me. "First day here. Don't let the decorations fool you." I turned. There she was, Eleanor Marsh, 68. Silver hair, thin frame, but eyes sharp as broken glass. She held a paper cup of bitter tea leaning against the doorway like she'd been watching me for a while. "I was a military nurse once," she said. "Here, they don't really care, but I'll show you a few tricks to survive." Survive, not live. The word made something cold crawl up my spine. Before I could answer, a tall figure appeared at the end of the hall. Dr. Alan Morris, the facility administrator. gray coat hair slicked back with too much gel face carved into a permanent frown. He looked at me for exactly 1 second, long enough to register that I was a cost, not a person. Then he said, "Budget cuts. Get used to it. No welcome. No Merry Christmas. Not even a polite nod." He turned and walked away, each step of his shoes echoing with a dry, empty rhythm. I watched him go. It felt familiar, the eerie silence that creeps in right before a building collapses. This place was ready to cave in. Not physically, but morally. That afternoon, I walked the corridor looking for the hot water machine. Near the laundry room, I overheard 2 staff whispering Future Holdings bought us last year. Yeah, and they're drowning in tax debt. Heard they want to slash costs again. We're already understaffed as hell. I didn't stop walking, just slowed my steps. I'd heard this before in the fire department. Conversations like that always meant one thing. Someone was going to get hurt if no one stepped in. Maplewood was burning in a different way, financially, morally, humanely, and the residents, including me, were sitting at the center of that blaze. When I returned to my room, I sat on the metal bed. I placed my firefighter helmet number 47 on the table. The last anchor I had left in this world. My phone buzzed. A message from my neighbor, Martha Lewis, the woman who lived across from me for 15 years. I opened it. A photo. My heart dropped. It was my house, the front door, the wooden fence I repainted last summer, the old pine tree my wife planted 20 years ago. And right in the center of the yard, a giant sign. For sale. Price reduced contact. Ryan Kane. My stomach hollowed out. I didn't know if the cold I felt came from the drafty window or from the truth staring back at me. My son, the boy I raised, the one I carried through the night when he had a fever in '92. The child I worked overtime for, prayed for, sacrificed sleep and health for, was selling my house. While I was still alive. While I had been in Maplewood less than 48 hours. No call, no permission, no hesitation. Just a sign. A cold, unforgiving sign standing in my yard like a tombstone. I sat there for a long time. A very long time. The wind howled outside. The fluorescent light kept flickering, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know whether this place was a nursing home or a holding cell for souls waiting to be forgotten. I had been in Maplewood for almost 3 weeks. 3 weeks surrounded by the sharp smell of bleach. 3 weeks of lunches so watery they tasted like dishwater. 3 weeks of hearing Eleanor cough through a paper-thin wall every night. 3 weeks of staring at flickering fluorescent lights until my head felt feverish. But the worst night, the one that hollowed something inside me, was the night I saw that for sale sign in Martha's message. I couldn't sleep after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered Ryan's tiny hands grasping my neck when he first learned to walk. And then I'd see that sign hammered into my front yard. There was only so much a man could hold. On the morning of January 5th, 2025, I called him. The phone rang a long time. When Ryan finally answered, his voice was cold as January wind. "Dad, I didn't waste time. Why is my house for sale?" There was half a second of silence, the kind of silence people take when deciding how big a lie they want to tell. Then Ryan said in a tone as soft and hollow as a corporate email, "I'm arranging what's best for you. I heard every word, but not every word was the truth." I pressed on. "Selling my house is best for me." He didn't answer because Lisa snatched the phone. Her voice came sharp, clean-cutting. "Everything's legal, Dad. You shouldn't stress yourself at your age." At your age. That phrase lodged in my throat. I didn't know what age qualifies a man to be treated like liquidation inventory, but to them, 72 apparently did. I swallowed the sting and said, "You both know this isn't right." Ryan slipped back onto the call. Voice dropped low. The tone people use when they want to shut down an argument completely. "Dad, I'm doing what you couldn't." That line, cut deeper than any blade. It didn't just call me helpless. It said I, his father, was no longer of value. I hung up. There was no point in arguing. When someone has already decided you're a burden, everything you say becomes nothing more than background noise. I sat on the edge of the bed and remembered what happened back in March 2024, the day I slipped in the garage while reaching for the ladder. Ryan took me to the ER. My hand was wrapped. I was dizzy from pain meds. I remember an administrative clerk bringing forms. Ryan said, "It's just a power of attorney so I can help you with paperwork while you're recovering." I trusted him. I didn't read carefully. I signed. It was the POA, power of attorney, full financial control. I had handed him the right to do anything with my assets. And I didn't know I had just given my entire life to someone who would soon place me in a nursing home. Remembering that now, I felt my hands trembling, not from fear, but from how foolish I had been. 3 days later, January 8th, 2025. I was walking slowly down the hallway trying to settle into Maplewood's dull routines when Eleanor hurried toward me. "Douglas, someone's here for you." I thought maybe someone from Adult Protective Services had come. But no. When I entered the small lounge, I saw Martha Lewis standing there, snow-dusting the shoulders of her brown wool coat. Martha. I couldn't hide my surprise. She never went out in winter. She'd had a knee replacement last year. She stepped forward and placed a large envelope in my hands, soft and heavy with documents. Her voice shook. "Douglas, you need to see this. I asked the real estate office for a copy. They think you already approved the sale." I opened the envelope. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted out. Inside were the house sale contract, the real estate agent's paperwork, a signature authorization form, and the most important piece, the date. Date signed December 11th, 2024. 2 weeks before Christmas dinner. So, while I was hanging lights on my porch, playing carols inside, roasting turkey, and setting the table for my son, Ryan had been signing away my home. Christmas wasn't when he decided to put me in a nursing home. Christmas was the ceremony where he finally informed me that everything was already done. Eleanor hissed softly when she saw the date. Martha placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Douglas, your son doesn't think about you anymore." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I could. I've heard fire crack, heard men scream, heard roofs collapse. But I had never felt what I felt staring at that date. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the dark, my firefighter helmet number 47 resting on the table like the last piece of Harold Whitman watching over me. I remembered something Harold told me after the 1998 warehouse fire, "Doug, people think fire kills, but it's the smoke that gets you." Ryan didn't use fire. He used smoke. The smoke of apathy, the smoke of entitlement, the smoke behind the words, "I'm doing what's best for you." I needed someone who knew how to clear smoke from a burning room. The next morning I called the only man I trusted, Benjamin Moore, 58, the old fire department attorney. The man who helped me win a lawsuit back in 2003, when a family accused us of arriving too late to save their home. I said only one sentence, "Ben, I need you." And he answered instantly without hesitation, "I'll be there tomorrow." And at that moment, I knew my next battle had begun, the last fire I would ever fight. And this time, I wasn't running in to save a building. I was running in to save my life. February 2025. Winter had settled over Maplewood like a heavy, unmoving sheet of white. The kind of cold that doesn't just bite your skin, it gets into your bones, makes every sound outside feel sharp, metallic, almost brittle. Inside room 12B. I sat alone at the narrow table, my firefighter helmet number 47 placed gently beside me. Its edge caught the weak glow of the bedside lamp, turning the old scratched metal into a fading relic of the man I used to be. I was staring at it the way some men stare at gravestones, with a mix of grief, memory, and an ache no one else could see. Around 9 a.m. the door creaked open. A tall figure stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders and shaking off the February wind. Benjamin Moore, 58, lean, gray at the temples, glasses fogged from the cold. The attorney who had stood by me through lawsuits, false accusations, and the darkest moments of my firefighting career. He closed the door softly, then looked slowly around the cramped room. The flickering fluorescent light, the thin mattress, the drafty window. When his eyes landed on me, they softened. "Doug," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I nodded. I had been waiting. Not for good news, but for the truth. Moore sat down opposite me and placed his leather briefcase on the table. His hands hesitated for a moment, something rare for a man who had spent decades in courtrooms. Then click. The metal latch opened. He reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of folders, legal documents, contracts, forms. But on top was something that made my heart pause. A yellow envelope. Old, edges soft, seal broken long ago, and my name written across the front in thick, uneven block letters. Moore slid it toward me. "This," he said, voice low, "is Harold's last will." I felt the air grow heavier. "Harold passed in 2022. Moore continued. He left something for you." My throat tightened. I traced the writing on the envelope with my thumb. To Douglas Kane, my brother in the fire. Harold J. Whitman. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was Harold's will, handwritten, notarized, and worn from years of storage. Moore spoke as I read. "He left you 3 assets. None of them flashy, but all meaningful. 1. A small house in Parma. A humble place, but full of Harold's handiwork. He had rebuilt the porch himself, sanded the floors, planted the maple tree in the backyard. 2. Minority shares in Whitman Fire Systems. A modest stake, but enough to give me leverage and options. 3. A cash trust. Not a fortune, but enough for Harold to call it for the man who once saved my life." Moore paused, adjusting his glasses before saying, "He wanted to make sure you had something in case life ever threw you someplace you didn't deserve to be." My eyes stung. Harold had always seen me in ways my own son never had. Moore reached back into the envelope and pulled out a smaller piece of paper, folded twice, edges, yellow handwriting, shaky but purposeful. A letter. Harold's final letter to me. I unfolded it carefully. The first line knocked the breath out of my chest. "Doug, you once carried me out of a burning hell. Now, let me carry you." The room fell silent. Outside, the winter wind rattled the window like an old memory banging to be let in. My hands shook as I kept reading. "A man like you deserves dignity, not loneliness. If life ever turns its back on you, this will turn you back on your feet." Quiet tears slid down my face. I had pulled Harold out of the flames in 1998, but here he was, years after his death, pulling me out of something even worse, the fire of my own family's betrayal. Moore let me sit in silence for a moment, then gently cleared his throat and opened the second folder. His face darkened. "Doug, I reviewed the POA you signed last year." My stomach tightened. He laid the photocopy on the table, my own signature messy and lopsided from when my hand was wrapped in bandages after the garage fall. Moore spoke slowly, like delivering a diagnosis. "Your son used the POA to sell your house without your consent." A sharp, stabbing pain radiated through my chest. Moore continued, "The listing, the negotiations, the signing, all happened before Christmas dinner. This is elder financial exploitation, Doug. Serious exploitation. Every word was a blade. Every syllable felt like another cut. I closed my eyes and remembered Christmas night, Ryan whispering on the porch, 'Paperwork's done. Transfer form. Sell before spring.' I had told myself the wind distorted what I heard, but the truth was clearer now than the snow outside. I hadn't misheard. I had just refused to believe my son was capable of it." Moore pushed a stack of documents toward me. "We can fight this," he said, "but we have to do it quietly." Then he outlined a plan, methodical, strategic, powerful. 1. Revoke the POA in county court. Emergency petition. Direct evidence of abuse. Immediate removal of Ryan's authority. 2. Create Whitman Holdings LLC. A shell company. Anonymous ownership. Invisible to Ryan. Moore leaned in. If he learns you own anything at all, he'll try to reach it through manipulation or old paperwork. I nodded. He was right. 3. Prepare to buy Maplewood. Moore lowered his voice until it was barely above a whisper. Future Holdings is drowning in tax debt. They're on the verge of liquidation. They may be forced to sell Maplewood within a few months. I stared at him. A man sleeping on a metal bed, eating cold oatmeal for breakfast, becoming the owner of the whole place. Moore held my gaze firmly. Doug, Harold wanted you protected. This might be how it happens. He waited for my answer. I reached out and rested my palm on helmet 47, the last piece of my old self. My bones were weaker now. My grip wasn't what it used to be, but the fire inside me, the one Harold had kept alive in his letter, that flame burned steady. I said, we do this quietly. I want justice, not noise. Moore nodded, eyes steady, seeing not an old man in a nursing home, but the firefighter he had once stood beside. I looked toward the window. Snowflakes drifted past the glass, caught in the wind, spinning, falling, rising again. And for the first time since being dropped at Maplewood, I didn't feel cold. There was warmth inside me. A spark. A purpose. The flame Harold left for me. A flame I would use to stand back up and reclaim every piece of my life that Ryan tried to take. Ever since my meeting with Moore, I had begun looking at Maplewood with different eyes. It was no longer the place I had been parked in, no longer a holding area for the elderly. It was a building quietly burning, not with flames, but with human neglect. I used to tell rookies at the firehouse, fire kills fast, neglect kills slow. But the worst part, neglect leaves no one to blame. Maplewood was living proof of that lesson. On February 7th, 2025, I sat in the small Maplewood dining room. In front of me was a lunch tray that looked like it was meant for punishment, not nourishment. A scoop of mashed potatoes thinner than dishwater. A few pieces of chicken so pale I couldn't tell fat from meat, and a gravy that tasted like something rejected by a discount food supplier. I'd eaten better during a budget crisis in 1989 at the firehouse, and back then we reused gloves and patched our own boots because we had no money. But this wasn't food for a human being. At the table beside me, an elderly woman tapped her spoon against her plate and sighed. This isn't food. It's punishment. No one disagreed, because everyone in that room knew the truth. Later that afternoon, I saw something that clenched my chest like a fist. An old man sat in his wheelchair at the end of the hallway, still, blank stare, frozen in place. It was the posture of someone who had been sitting far too long. I walked over gently. Sir, are you okay? He turned, lips trembling. I've been here since last night. They forgot to take me back to my room. I looked at my watch. 11:47 a.m. That meant he had been there for 12 hours alone. In the dark. In a drafty hallway. Ignored by every passing staff member. If this had been a fire, I would have rushed in without thinking. But this wasn't fire. This was systemic abandonment. And in its own way, it was worse. That evening I met Caleb Rivers, 29, maintenance technician. Tall, lean, always smelling faintly of motor oil. A kid with honest eyes, the kind you don't see often in places like this. He knocked on my door, holding a wrench. Sir, your heater's buzzing. Let me fix it. He kneeled beside the vents, tightening loose screws. I watched him work, steady hands, careful movements. A rare thing in this place, someone who still cared. As he worked, he spoke quietly. I try my best, Mr. Kane. But this place, it's falling apart. We're understaffed, underfunded, and nobody up there cares. He pointed upward toward the administrative offices. I gave a slow nod. I already knew. The next morning, Eleanor knocked softly on my door. She never knocked hard, just enough for me to hear. "Douglas, we need to talk." I let her in. She glanced down the hallway, then lowered her voice. "They're switching our medication." I frowned. "Switching? Why cheaper suppliers?" she whispered. "Different brands, mild side effects, for now. But long term." Her voice quivered, but her eyes sharp as a battlefield nurse never wavered. I exhaled. It made sense. Future Holdings and Morris would cut anything as long as it wasn't their own paycheck. On February 20th, I passed through the dining room and found Caleb being scolded by Dr. Morris. Caleb stood hunched like a child being reprimanded. Morris jabbed a clipboard at him, face red with frustration over something trivial. A light bulb, a broken wheel, who knows? I stepped forward. "Is there a problem?" I asked. Morris turned, annoyance flashing across his face. "You stay out of this, Mr. Kane. You're not a firefighter anymore." That line, I'd heard it from incompetent supervisors before, as if the title firefighter came with an expiration date. I looked him dead in the eye. My voice was calm, steady, measured. Waiting for the right moment to put out a fire is what makes a firefighter. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, Morris froze. Then he huffed, turned around, and marched away. Caleb stared at me wide-eyed. "Thanks." Not many people stand up to him. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You keep doing your job," I said. "I'll keep doing mine." He blinked. "And what's your job?" I looked at my hands, the same hands that once carried people out of burning houses. Making sure this place doesn't burn down. Literally or morally. March 3rd, 2025. Lunchroom was unusually crowded pudding day. Cheap, but the residents liked it. I sat beside Eleanor when suddenly, thud. A chair crashed. A man named Henry stood up, clutching his throat. Face turning bright red. Eyes bulging. He was choking, and not a single staff member moved. They just watched, frozen, unprepared, untrained. I stood instantly. "Move!" I shouted. My voice echoed through the room. I slid behind Henry, placed my arms around him, and thrust upward. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th thrust, a chunk of pudding shot from his mouth and landed on the table. Henry gasped for air, tears streaming, hands trembling. I kept a hand on his back. "Easy. Breathe. You're okay now." Silence filled the dining hall. Then a whisper. "The old firefighter saved a life today." Then another. "He saved him. He actually saved him. He still got it." I looked around. Dozens of eyes on me, full of hope, respect, and something Maplewood had been missing for a long time: trust. I wiped my hands on a napkin and said quietly, "I just did what anyone would." But deep down I knew. Not everyone can still run toward danger. Not everyone remembers how to save a life. Not everyone still has that instinct. But I did. And in that moment I realized something important: Maplewood needed me. These people needed me. And unlike my son, I would not abandon them. April 2025. Snow had finally begun to melt across Cleveland, but Maplewood remained as cold as ever. A kind of cold that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with the absence of human warmth. I had been here for over 4 months. 4 months, long enough for me to memorize every squeaking door hinge, every yellow stain on the walls, every weary sigh from the residents, every indifferent glance from understaffed workers, and every dismissive comment from Dr. Morris. I had seen fire destroy homes, families, and entire lives. But inside Maplewood, I saw something far worse than flames. People being forgotten while still alive. But in the middle of all that quiet decay, something unexpected happened. Something that changed everything. On the morning of April 10th, 2025, I was sitting in Maplewood's back courtyard, the one place where I could still hear actual wind instead of the groaning heaters and rattling vents. The old wooden bench beneath me creaked like it was tired, like it had heard too many stories and carried too many forgotten souls. The back door opened with a sharp metallic click. A man in a blue jacket, boots dusted with melting snow, stepped into the courtyard. In his hand was a notebook. He approached me. "Mr. Kane." I looked up and nodded. He extended his hand with a warm, genuine smile. "Ethan Miller, Cleveland Community Tribune." The name wasn't unfamiliar. Veterans across Ohio respected him, one of the last reporters who treated journalism like a responsibility, not a chase for cheap clicks. Ethan sat down across from me. "I heard about what happened in the dining hall last month," he said. "The choking incident." I shrugged lightly. "Reflex," I told him. "There are things you don't forget." He flipped a page in his notebook. "Maybe, but someone told me none of the staff moved. Only you did." I stared at the trembling branches in the courtyard, a wind cutting through them gently. "When you've spent 30 years running into burning buildings," I said quietly, "you stop remembering how to run away." Ethan gave a soft, sad smile. We talked for nearly an hour. I told him about Harold Whitman, about Helmet 47, about long winter nights on duty in '98, about being placed in Maplewood like a broken appliance, an object past its usefulness. He didn't ask cheap questions. He didn't poke for drama. He didn't pry into Ryan. Instead, he asked me something no one had asked in 4 months. "Doug, what do you want?" I paused. My answer came out like a sigh, like something I'd been holding for too long. "Respect." Just that. 2 days later, the article was published. The firefighter they left behind. No clickbait, no manufactured tragedy, no poor old man narrative. Just the truth. A 72-year-old former firefighter who saved a choking resident while being treated like a burden in the very place meant to care for him. The article spread across Ohio. Veterans Association members reached out. Emails poured in. One message read, "Brother, the fire never left you. We see you." When I read that line, I felt something Maplewood had taken from me for months: to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be respected. But the article did more than warm my heart. It triggered a reaction from someone with real power. On April 17th, the Maplewood doors opened, and a woman walked in with purpose. Brown hair pulled into a tight ponytail. Black coat. Eyes sharp, alert, alive. The name on her badge: Angela Brooks, Adult Protective Services. She found me in the activity room. "Mr. Kane." Her voice was firm, direct. I nodded. Angela set her case down and opened it. On the table she laid out bank transaction copies, the POA document, the house sale contract, a financial exploitation report, the photo of my home with the for sale sign, Martha's written note, and a printed copy of Ethan's article. She wasn't gentle in the way people sometimes are with the elderly. She didn't speak softly or pretend pity. She spoke like someone fighting for me, not over me. "Mr. Kane," she said clearly, "we believe you are a victim of financial exploitation." My throat tightened. Angela watched my face carefully. I inhaled slowly. "Listen," I said. "I don't need pity. I need the law to work." Angela paused, then a very small smile crossed her lips. Not a sympathetic smile. A respectful one. "Then you came to the right place," she said. That same day, Angela opened a full investigation: financial abuse, coercion, violation of elder autonomy, misuse of POA, suspicious sale of assets. Before leaving Maplewood, she said, "We will get to the truth, Mr. Kane." It had been a long time since someone said something that solid without sounding like they were lying to themselves. A week later, Moore came to Maplewood. Rain soaked his coat, dripped from his hair, but his eyes were sharp like a man who had just uncovered something big. He entered my room, closed the door, and said, "Doug, it's happening." I frowned. "What is?" Moore opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. "Future Holdings," he said. "They're collapsing." On the screen were headlines and reports. IRS audit opened unpaid supplier invoices. Massive tax debt. Staff cuts in violation of state code. 3 civil lawsuits underway. More tapped Maplewood's listing on the internal document. They're planning to offload Maplewood to pay off debt. Soon. I leaned back. Suddenly everything clicked. The thin blankets, the watery food, the failing heaters, the switched medications, the forgotten residents. It wasn't just incompetence. It was the mark of a sinking ship. Moore rested his hand on the table. Doug, this is the moment. This is the window Harold meant in that letter. I thought of Harold's handwriting. You once carried me out of a burning hell. Now, let me carry you. Harold wasn't just saving me. He was guiding me to this exact point. I took a long, steady breath. All the years I spent saving people, all the cold nights in Maplewood, all the bitterness from Ryan's betrayal. It all led here. Moore asked softly, Doug, what do you want to do? I placed my palm on helmet 47, lifted my chin and spoke words I never imagined I'd say at 72. If they want to sell Maplewood, we'll be the ones to buy it. Moore's lips curled into a rare smile. Not the smile of a lawyer, the smile of a man who knew a war had just begun. April melted slowly into May. Then May slipped almost unnoticed into June. The world outside Maplewood was thawing snow, retreating branches, budding Cleveland waking from winter's coma. But Maplewood felt like it was stuck in a season that never changed. A quiet gray winter made of budget cuts, silent suffering, and the soft wheezing breaths of old folks who'd stopped expecting better. In those months, I slept less, ate less, and spoke even less. Not because age had caught me, but because I was watching. After 30 years in the fire service, a man learns 2 things. 1. The most dangerous fire isn't the one you see, it's the one smoldering behind the walls. 2. If you want to stop a fire, you first need to know what's burning. And Maplewood was burning from inside out, a quiet, unseen flame named Future Holdings. It was April 28th when Caleb knocked on my door. He wasn't usually nervous, but that day he kept glancing down the hallway. Mr. Kane, you need to look at something. In his hands was a thick stack of documents, creased, highlighted, coffee-stained. He placed the first set in front of me. The meal reduction documents. Protein portions cut by 40%. Fresh fruit reduced from 4x week, 1x week. Soups diluted 20% more. Evening snacks eliminated for half the residents. Milk replaced with a brand so cheap it tasted like chalked water. My hand curled into a fist. I'd fed firefighters during night shifts in 1989, back when funding was so tight, we washed old gloves instead of buying new ones. But even then, we ate better than this. Caleb cleared his throat and placed the next set down. The medication switch list. Critical life-supporting meds. Anxiety, hypertension, arthritis. Depression. Heart meds for 3 residents. Replaced with off-brand, low-grade generics. Why would they do this? I asked. Caleb didn't soften the truth. They sold the old meds to a secondary reseller, just to get cash. A slow, cold anger climbed my spine. Before I could speak, Caleb placed a third document in my hands. The inventory sell-off sheet. Maplewood had been selling old wheelchairs, backup heaters, medical cabinets, winter blankets, spare oxygen tubing, even the lamp staff used for night checks. They were selling the tools meant to keep people alive. I stared at the list until the words blurred. Caleb whispered, Mr. Kane, this place needs someone who still sees right from wrong. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Because truth doesn't need raising of voices, it hits hard enough on its own. While Maplewood decayed 1 screw, 1 meal, 1 stolen dollar at a time, my son's life was falling apart in real time. And I watched all of it, not with satisfaction, but with the heavy silence of a father who had given everything to a son who gave nothing back. Early May. Ryan received the email. We appreciate your proposal, but due to internal restructuring, we will not proceed. One cold sentence. A guillotine. Years of work undone in a single paragraph. Martha told me Ryan was pacing his driveway for almost an hour afterward, hands on his head muttering curses at the sky. Neighbors overheard Lisa practically yelling, "Everyone is investing. Future Holdings is expanding across Ohio. This is our way out, Ryan." And Ryan, my son who once clung to my shirt at age 5 during thunderstorms, was now a grown man clinging to whatever financial lifeboat he could find. He emptied his savings. Their emergency fund even took a bank loan. Every cent poured into the real estate chain. Future Holdings promoted. In the first week of June, financial alerts hit the Ohio networks. Future Holdings was collapsing. Their projects tanked in 72 hours. Ryan's bank account, $32,000, $218. More showed me the statements. The red numbers hurt my eyes. And for a long minute I felt nothing. Not joy, not revenge, just a still, quiet ache. Emails began flooding Ryan's inbox: late fees, overdue loans, legal warnings, partner demands, bank threats, account suspension notices. 27 debt emails in 14 days. Martha told me she heard Ryan shouting in the garage, "Why is everything falling apart? Why me? Why now?" When she repeated those words, I just sat there. Not proud, not cruel, just understanding the simple truth. Life has a way of teaching lessons a father no longer can. In room 12B, beneath flickering lights and the hum of a failing heater, I worked. No anger, no noise, just purpose. I recorded Morris's quiet threats, photographed changed pill bottles, saved meal reduction sheets, documented overheard staff complaints, kept receipts, logs, timestamps, collected witness statements. Every file went to Moore and Angela piece by piece. I wasn't planning revenge. Revenge is loud. I was planning justice. Justice is quiet, patient, heavy, and it moves at its own pace. Late June, my phone buzzed. Martha Douglas. She left him. I stood frozen. When I called, Martha spoke softly, like telling bad news to a family at a hospital. She'd seen it all from her porch, Lisa dragging 2 suitcases, face swollen from crying, shoving them into her mother's car. Neighbors overheard shouting, "I told you this investment was stupid. I'm not losing my future because of you." But the final blow: Lisa secretly sold her Lexus, her prized possession, without telling Ryan. Sold it fast, under the table, for quick cash. If a marriage is a house, that moment was the beam snapping, the walls caving in, the roof sliding down. Lisa didn't just walk away, she abandoned the sinking ship. Not mine, Ryan's. I hung up the phone, placed it gently on the nightstand, and stared at my firefighter helmet. Harold's words echoed. The fire that saves a man is the same fire that destroys him if he's not careful. Ryan wasn't careful. He played with fire, greed, impatience, entitlement, and now the flames had circled back. For once, I wasn't the one running toward the fire. I was watching from the outside, quiet, steady, while the blaze he lit himself finally reached him. And Maplewood was next. Because once one fire starts to fall, it has a way of spreading. Summer arrived in Ohio like a warm breath rolling off the concrete, but inside Maplewood the cold remained. Not the kind that comes from a broken heater or an open window, but the kind that lingers when a place has been neglected for years, when it has been treated as a burden instead of a duty. For months I had looked at Maplewood the way a firefighter looks at a collapsing building. Every crack, every stain, every flickering bulb was a sign that death had been living here long before I arrived. But for the first time in a long time, I saw something else. A different kind of crack. A crack where light was starting to seep through. And everything began in the summer and exploded in September. Between July and September 2025, I witnessed a chain of events so dramatic, so sweeping that it felt like a documentary about the fall of a corrupt empire and the birth of something entirely new. Moore called it quiet restructuring, but there was nothing quiet about what happened. The first day of state inspections, Maplewood was in chaos. 3 Ohio state inspectors walked in with clipboards. Morris greeted them with a shaky smile, and the coffee he poured couldn't cover the sting of bleach that clung to every hallway. One inspector walked into the kitchen, lifted the lid off the soup pot, and grimaced. "This is 80% water." Another inspected medication bottles. "Expired. Wrong dosage. Wrong supplier." The third went through resident files. "Last shower. 14 days ago." When they passed the east hallway, an inspector stopped. A resident was slumped in a wheelchair, half asleep, coat slipping off his shoulders. "Why is he here alone?" Morris stammered. "We're short-staffed." The inspector wrote something sharply on her clipboard. "That's not an answer." I watched from a distance, arms crossed. I felt like I was witnessing the first tremor of a collapsing structure, slow, inevitable, irreversible. The sale happened on a suffocating August afternoon. Moore called from downtown Cleveland. His voice carried a weight I'd heard only once before, the day of Harold Whitman's funeral. "Doug, they've fallen." He told me later what he saw in that conference room. Future Holdings representatives with dark circles and undone ties. Tax files stacked like emergency flares. Emails from unpaid vendors overflowing like trash left too long in the sun. When Moore laid the purchase documents on the table, the director of Future Holdings rubbed his forehead and whispered, "Take it. Just take it before the IRS chokes us." And so they signed. Maplewood was sold to Whitman Holdings LLC, the quiet financial shell that Harold had entrusted to me. A perfectly disguised inheritance, a shield for ownership, a way to protect the vulnerable from those who prey on them. When the final signature dried, Moore called. "Doug, Maplewood is yours." I looked up at the cracked ceiling of room 12B. A drop of water from the old AC unit landed on my hand, cold sharp. But inside me, something warm sparked. Something I had not felt since the day I carried Harold out of the burning warehouse in 1998. They held the ceremony on a bright September morning. Residents wheeled themselves outside. Some stood with walkers, others leaned on canes. A few staff members gathered in small knots, whispering hopefully. Caleb and 2 techs removed the old sign, "Maplewood Veterans Home." When it fell to the ground, dust rose like the last breath of an old, tired building. I stood under a tree, hands clasped behind my back, not letting anyone see them shake. They raised the new sign, "Whitman Kane Veterans Home," in honor of service and brotherhood. The name Whitman blurred my vision. The name Kane tightened something deep inside my chest. Eleanor appeared beside me, her voice barely a whisper. "Beautiful, really beautiful." I couldn't speak. If I tried, my voice would crack. Right after the sign was unveiled, Angela and Moore walked straight into Morris's office. I stayed in the hallway, leaning against the wall, the way I used to stand outside burning buildings right before they blew from a backdraft. Inside, I heard the quiet, deadly tone of justice beginning its work. "Angela, Dr. Morris, you're aware that financial exploitation is a criminal offense in Ohio, Morris. What are you talking about?" Moore played the recording I had captured. "These old folks, they're ATMs with legs. Just squeeze them until they stop." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Morris's voice cracked. That's taken out of context." "Angela, no. That is exactly in context. They handed him documents. Termination notice, investigation order, mandatory handover of all admin passwords, ban on any contact with residents." I heard his chair scrape, then a desperate shout. "You don't know what you're doing! You'll regret this!" No one responded. The door slammed behind him, a sound that reminded me almost painfully of the warehouse door that crashed shut in the 1998 fire. The sound of an ending. Later that evening, Moore asked me, "Doug, "Where do you want your name on the building?" I looked down at my hands. These old hands that once held fire hoses lifted. Fallen beams carried Harold from the flames. I said softly, "Nowhere. Let the place heal first." He nodded, understanding without question. That was the thing about Moore he always understood. From then on, I appeared in internal files under a simple, almost anonymous title, Volunteer Advisor, Douglas K. Every morning I walked the building with the new administrator, Sophie Walker, 50 years old, short brown hair, deep, steady voice, eyes that saw everything but judged nothing until she understood it. Sophie said, "I want better meals, more staff on night shift, a real medical rotation." I answered, "Start with dignity. Everything else follows." She smiled like someone who recognized an older version of herself. The first day of the new system felt like a holiday. The dining hall smelled different, not like bleach or reheated canned soup, but like food. Real food. Hot plates, soft bread, thick soup, fresh apples, actual chicken, steam rising from every tray. Eleanor sat beside me, staring at her plate. For a moment I worried she was afraid to taste it, that she'd forgotten what real food was supposed to look like. But then she lifted her spoon. She tasted it, closed her eyes. 1 second, 2. Then she said the sentence that hit me deeper than any fire alarm ever had. "Feels like a place to live, not a place to wait." She turned her head, smiled, a real, gentle smile. "Doug, you did this." I shook my head. Harold did. Eleanor rested her hand on mine. "No, he left the spark. But you lit the fire." I looked around the dining room. Residents talking, staff smiling, warm yellow light instead of cold fluorescence. The new sign reflecting in the window. And somewhere upstairs my old fire helmet sitting quietly watching all this unfold. And I exhaled. Not the tired sigh of a man who has suffered too much, but the slow, grateful breath of a man who has walked through fire and somehow, against all odds, come out alive. October in Cleveland has a way of changing the air. The wind grows sharper, the sky fades into muted gray, and red leaves fall across the pavement like torn, desperate letters from autumn itself. And somewhere else in Cleveland, inside the house that once belonged to me, another thing was falling apart. Ryan Kane, my son. The man who put me in Maplewood sold my home behind my back and told himself it was for the best. But life has its own way of teaching lessons to people who cross lines they shouldn't cross. And October 2025 was the month when every storm Ryan set into motion finally came back for him. Moore continued updating me every week, always arriving with his brown leather folder and a face that read heavier and heavier each time. But this month, every update he brought felt like a verdict. 1. Ryan lost his job. Early October. Ryan received an internal email from the construction company he'd clung to for 2 years. Due to restructuring and budget cuts, your position has been eliminated. No apology, no recommendation, no soft landing, just a cold line that ended the last piece of stability he had. According to Martha, that morning, Ryan threw his dress shirt down the stairs, slammed his car door, and then sat in the garage for nearly an hour, head-bowed, hands limp between his knees, as if he'd forgotten how to breathe. 2. His investment vanished completely. Moore brought me the bank statements. Every cent from the sale of my house, Ryan and Lisa's 7-year savings, a $15,000 bank loan, and the safe investment. Lisa insisted on those real estate portfolios backed by future holdings. All of it collapsed into nothing. The last line on the statement, remaining balance, $147.32. That narrow, pitiful number was all that remained of Ryan's financial life. 3 fights, fractures, and Lisa walked out. Martha told me the entire neighborhood heard the fight. One evening in early October, screaming echoed across the street. Lisa's voice sharp, breaking. "We lost everything because of you." Ryan roared back. "You said it was safe. You trusted them." A door slammed so hard it rattled windows. Glass clinked. A picture frame fell. 3 days later, Lisa returned, but not in her Lexus. She had already sold that. She arrived in her mother's old sedan, threw a suitcase onto the front porch, and said, "I'm done. I'm not sinking with you." And she drove away. In Ryan's home, the cracks had finally become craters. 4. APS launched a formal investigation. Right when Ryan was drowning the hardest, a letter appeared in his mailbox. Notice of investigation. Potential elder financial exploitation, unauthorized withdrawal of $40, $300. Martha told me. Ryan just stood there frozen under the autumn rain, hands shaking so badly that the letter slipped from his grip and fell onto the wet sidewalk. He didn't even pick it up. The rain swallowed the ink long before he could find the strength to move. 20. October 2025. 9:00 a.m. The day Ryan came to Maplewood. Caleb burst into my room breathless. "Douglas, someone's here to see you. He says, he's your son." My hand stopped in midair. I wasn't ready, but part of me always knew this moment would come. I walked to the front lobby, and when I saw Ryan, I felt my chest hollow out. He didn't look like my son. He looked like a man carved out of regret. Eyes bloodshot, cheeks sunken, shirt wrinkled, hands trembling, back hunched like someone twice his age, breathing in broken, uneven bursts. He wasn't the confident man who had once decided I belonged in a nursing home. He looked like a man who had lost everything, and for the first time in his life understood exactly why. He stared at me for several seconds before finally whispering, voice cracking, "Dad, I need help." My heart tightened. I had seen dozens of people destroyed by fires, but never someone burned alive by his own decisions. I didn't step forward. I didn't step away. I simply said, "Come, sit." We sat at the old wooden table in the common room, the same place where I drunk the bitterest coffee of my life months ago. I stood, poured 2 cups. My hands shook slightly, not from anger, but from the weight of years that had finally come full circle. Ryan kept staring at the table. I sat back down and said clearly, calmly, "You sold my house. To buy a dream someone sold you." Ryan's breath caught. Tears slid down his face, but he didn't wipe them. I continued, "I won't give you money." His eyes closed. That sentence alone felt like a knife through him. But I wasn't done. "But I will give you work." He looked up confused. "Work?" I nodded. "There's a position here. Maintenance. Fixing things. Keeping people safe." Ryan looked around Maplewood. The bright dining floors, the warm lights, the residents laughing softly over their lunches. He whispered, "I don't deserve that." I leaned forward. Very few people deserve a second chance. The real question is, will you use it? Ryan broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way a man breaks when every layer of pride has been peeled away and there is nothing left to hide behind. I didn't touch him. I didn't say it's okay. I didn't say I forgive you. I simply let him cry the way I once let a fire hose run empty that night in 1998. That afternoon, Ryan's first step toward redemption. Sophie Walker called him in for an interview. They tested him gently. Could he fix a heater? Replace a bulb? Repair a wheelchair? Understand basic safety? He passed tired, shaky, but honest. Sophie said, "We need someone who cares. The pay is modest, but the work is honest." Ryan nodded. "I'll take it." When he stepped back into the hallway, he saw me waiting. He tried to smile. I nodded just once, a tiny gesture, but enough to tell him I'm not turning my back. What Ryan didn't know, what no staff member knew, was that the sign outside Whitman Kane Veterans Home carried his name. And the man who made that possible, the man who saved Maplewood from collapse, was the same father he once abandoned. Ryan walked toward the maintenance room where Caleb stood waiting to train him. He had no idea. That moment, that quiet, trembling walk down the hallway was the first step of his new life. Not because he was forgiven, but because he was finally being allowed to fix something. November winds swept through the courtyard of the Whitman Kane Veterans Home, carrying the scent of dry leaves, cold soil, and the unmistakable smell of old winters I had once faced as a firefighter. Residents strolled with the help of staff. The sky was dull, the trees bare, and down the far end of the hallway, I saw Ryan holding an old toolbox with dark circles under his eyes and a faded shirt that looked one size too big for him. This was not the Ryan Kane I brought into the world 38 years ago. Not the man who once told me Maplewood was the best place for me. Not the man who sold my home like it was an inconvenient piece of clutter. This was someone life had carved down to bone, a man forced to relearn from the beginning how to be a decent human being. Ryan didn't know where to begin. He stood in the hallway, stiff-lost small. Caleb had to guide him through every step, patiently, gently, just as if he were training someone who had forgotten how to live. Fixing the AC in room 14B, Ryan knelt under the old AC unit. The screws were rusted dust clinging in thick gray patches. An elderly woman in the bed nearby whispered softly, "You knew, sweetheart?" Ryan looked up, forcing a smile. "Yes, ma'am." A cloud of black dust fell straight onto his face. He didn't wipe it off. He just lowered his head and kept working. I watched from the end of the hall, not to judge, not to interfere, just to witness. Ryan stood on a ladder replacing a fluorescent bulb that had flickered for an entire week. His hands trembled as he twisted the bulb. He lost his grip. Crash! Glass exploded across the floor. Ryan closed his eyes, swallowed the shame, and exhaled like someone trying not to break apart. Caleb placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Happens to all of us." Ryan nodded without a word, then bent down and cleaned up the mess. Wednesday afternoon, the wheelchair. An elderly man asked Ryan to fix a stuck wheelchair wheel. Ryan took it apart, cleaned off the rust, oiled it, tightened everything. The man watched him with soft, sorrowful eyes. "You look like me, when I was trying to fix the pieces of my life." Ryan froze for half a second, then lowered his head and kept working. The basement was the worst place in the whole building. Mold on the walls, rusted pipes, a damp chill that clung to your bones, weak yellow light that barely reached the floor. Ryan had to go there 3 times a week. Caleb handed him gloves. "This room shows who you are. Keep it clean. And you'll feel cleaner too." Ryan nodded quietly. I watched from the doorway. His back was bent, but not broken. But the real change didn't come from sweat. It came on a night of heavy rain. The night everything shifted. A storm whipped the windows like ropes snapping. Lightning lit up the hallways. Most residents had gone to sleep. I had just set my firefighter helmet 47 on my table, when I heard footsteps pounding the hallway. Urgent, panicked, heavy. I opened my door. Ryan was running toward the nurse's station, carrying an elderly veteran in his arms. The man was limp, heat radiating off him like a furnace going out of control. He collapsed. "He's burning up!" Ryan's voice cracked with fear. The nurse fumbled her phone, trembling as she dialed 911. Ryan didn't wait. He laid the veteran gently on the floor, slipped his jacket under the man's head, kept his airway straight, checked his breathing, held his hand. I walked over, not to take over, not to intervene, just to witness my son doing something I had prayed he still had in him. Ryan whispered, "Sir, stay with me. Don't go. Not tonight. Please." His voice wasn't the voice of a man who once pushed me into Maplewood and said, "You'll be fine there." It wasn't the voice of a man who saw his father as a burden. It was the voice of someone terrified of losing another human being. When the paramedics arrived, Ryan refused to move aside. He stayed kneeling next to the veteran until they lifted him onto the stretcher. "You did good, man," one of the paramedics said. Ryan didn't look at them. He looked at me. And in his eyes, for the first time in years, I saw something I never thought I'd see again. Understanding. Real painful human understanding. I watched from afar. No praise, no sermon, no disappointed silence. Just observation and patience. I didn't hug him. I didn't say I'm proud of you. Not because I didn't feel it, but because praise too soon can shatter the fragile seed of humility trying to grow inside him. I simply rested my hand on the railing and said, "Go rest. Tomorrow will be long." Ryan nodded, exhausted but not running away. He walked off into the dim hallway, and for the first time, I believed change was taking root. November 3rd, 2025. The Discovery. A cold morning. Heavy fog hanging over the yard. Ryan was in the administrative office searching for a pen to sign his daily maintenance report. His eyes drifted to the framed state license on the wall. Ohio State Care Facility Operation License Certificate of Ownership Owner. Whitman Holdings, LLC Authorized Signatory Douglas Kane. His heart must have stopped. He stepped back, hands shaking, lips parting but no sound coming out. I stood outside the doorway watching him through the crack. He stared at that license for a very long time. A very, very long time. Then he did something I never expected. He didn't confront me, didn't ask for answers, didn't demand an explanation. He simply bowed his head, signed his work assignment, picked up his toolbox, and went upstairs to fix a broken heater in room 204 as if nothing had changed. But his footsteps were different, slower, steadier, and ashamed in the right way. And that kind of shame, the honest kind, is the fire that can rebuild a man from ashes. November 11th, 2025. Veterans Day in Ohio. An American flag fluttered gently in the cold early winter wind outside the Whitman Kane veterans' home. The sky was gray, not a gloomy gray, but the thoughtful gray of memories of men who once fought battles and of hearts that never retired from the word honor. I walked out to the rose garden, the place where I watered Harold's favorite rosebush every morning. The dew on the petals looked like droplets of molten metal glinting in the muted sun. And there, Ryan was waiting. Hands tucked into his coat pockets, face older by years despite only a few months passing. Shoulders slightly slumped like someone carrying the weight of a lifetime. He took a deep breath, then spoke. Ryan's voice was quiet but steady. "Dad, I know. I saw the ownership license. I know this place is yours." I didn't react, didn't startle, didn't pretend surprise. I just looked him straight in the eyes, the same eyes that once sparkled with youth confidence and entitlement, but now carried shame so heavy he could barely lift his head under it. I said slowly, "Son, I didn't punish you. I didn't humiliate you. Life did." Ryan blinked rapidly. His breath caught. I continued. "All I did was step aside and let the truth do its work." That struck him like a blow. He trembled not with fear, but with the final collapse of every wall he had built to avoid seeing himself clearly. Then it happened. He raised his hands, covered his face like a child, and he cried. Not loud, not dramatically, not out of frustration, but the quiet, devastating cry of a man who finally sees the reflection he's been running from all his life and can no longer bear it. I watched my 38-year-old son sink to his knees in the middle of Harold's rose garden. I didn't move to hug him. Some fires must burn out inside a man before he can start again. When he lifted his head, tears streaking down his face, he whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry. For everything. For the house. For how I treated you. For not being the son you deserved." I took a long breath. You were the son I had. And that was enough. As soon as silence settled between us, Angela Brooks from APS appeared on the stone pathway, a folder tucked under her arm, coat zipped up against the cold wind. Her voice was firm but not unkind. "Douglas, Ryan, I have the final decision." Ryan straightened instantly. His hands tightened. He braced himself for whatever justice had waiting for him. Angela opened the file and read clearly. "Ryan must repay a portion of the money withdrawn. He will be under financial supervision for 12 months. He cannot open or co-sign loans for a year. He must enroll in a restorative action program. No criminal charges will be pursued." Ryan exhaled, half relief, half collapse, like someone who had expected a life sentence and instead received a chance to rebuild. Angela looked him in the eyes. "There are punishments, and there are lessons. This one is the latter. Don't waste it." She placed the file into my hands and walked away. I didn't watch her go. I watched Ryan, still trembling but no longer crumbling. Standing steadier than the day he first walked into my lobby begging for help. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out something I had carried for nearly 30 years. A tarnished firefighter's medal. The Medal of Duty from the Cleveland Fire Department, awarded to me in 1998 after the night I pulled Harold Whitman out of the chemical warehouse inferno. Its edges were scratched from debris collapsing around us. Its surface was darkened from smoke and heat. I held it for a moment in my palm, feeling every memory etched into its metal, then placed it gently in Ryan's hand. Ryan jerked back slightly. "Dad, I don't deserve this," I answered softly. "You're right." His eyes widened. I set a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't because you deserve it. It's because I believe that one day you will." Ryan bowed his head, gripping the medal like it was the first thing in years that made him feel worth something. Later that afternoon, residents and staff gathered in the main hall for the unveiling of a memorial plaque in honor of Harold. The brass plate gleamed under the overhead lights. "In honor of fire, Captain Harold Whitman, for the lives he saved and the one he changed forever." I placed my hand gently on the plaque. The cool metal seemed to pulse with memory. Ethan Miller, the journalist, arrived with his camera. He interviewed a few residents, took photos of the ceremony, then walked up to me. "Mr. Kane, I'm writing a follow-up. This time, it's about healing." The next morning his article was published, "The Firefighter Who Chose Care Over Comfort," by Ethan Miller. It told the story of a father cast aside by his own son, but who returned not for revenge, not for triumph, but to rebuild a place for the forgotten. After the ceremony, Ryan stood beside me, silent, not asking for forgiveness, not making promises, just standing there like a boy relearning how to stand with his father. I looked at him and whispered, "Son, honor never retires, not for me, and not for you." The wind passed through the courtyard. Leaves fell softly around us. The brass plaque shone in the fading afternoon light. And for the first time in a long time, I knew the fire in my family had not died. It had simply changed shape. November 12th, 2025. Exactly 1 year since the cold morning when I first learned my own son had signed the papers to place me in Maplewood, the place I once believed would be the final stop of my life. And yet here I was sitting in the courtyard of that very same building. A building with a new name, new light, new dignity, drinking coffee from my old cracked ceramic mug, the only thing Ryan didn't manage to sell. The Ohio sky was brighter than in previous years. Not because of the sun, but because of the people. This place no longer resembled the Maplewood I was dragged into last winter. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken and caramelized onions. The bread was soft, no longer stale, the soup thick, not watery like dishwater. The walls freshly painted. The windows no longer rattled when the wind blew. Warm yellow string lights hung across the front yard, glowing every evening like a tiny festival. Old country music drifted through the hallways. Hank Williams, Johnny Cash, Merle, Haggard. An 84-year-old black veteran played chess with a 79-year-old widow. Laughter echoed where only silence had existed before. I sat beneath the awning, my hand resting on fire helmet number 47. Harold would have grinned if he'd seen this place now. The fire we once fought to extinguish had become a fire that warmed instead of burned. Ryan walked across the courtyard, toolbox in hand, wearing the navy blue maintenance uniform. His face was thinner, older, but his eyes were no longer frantic. He stopped to fix the latch on a resident's wheelchair, steady, gentle, patient. No sighing, no irritation, no pretending he was doing anyone a favor. Then he knelt beside the rose trellis on the east side, Eleanor's favorite spot, the place she once said the words that stayed with me. Feels like a place to live, not to wait. Ryan remembered every name now. Morning, Mr. Bishop. How's your knee today? Ms. Clara. Want me to take a look at your radio? Mr. Jones? He worked quietly, consistently, like a man rebuilding his entire life, one screw at a time. Residents loved him. No one knew he was the son who sold his father's house and left him in an understaffed care facility. No one knew he was the reason Maplewood ever happened, and I chose not to let them know. Not every truth heals. Some truths only shatter what's being repaired. Roman, one of the veterans, once told me, "That young man, he's solid. You raised him well." I only smiled. Sometimes a father cannot teach his son. Sometimes only life can. I never destroyed Ryan. I never sought revenge. But life has its own laws. Future Holdings collapses. Morning news headline: Future Holdings declares bankruptcy after tax fraud revelations. The empire Ryan trusted blindly burned to ash. Lisa under IRS investigation. Strange transactions triggered a full audit. She tried calling Ryan again and again. He simply looked at the phone, then set it down. Not with bitterness, just closure. Dr. Morris loses everything. A month earlier, I watched his hearing live stream. He showed up in a baseball cap arguing with his own lawyer. Judgment neglect, financial misconduct, permanent ban from elder care operations. Not revenge, not satisfaction, just the fire he lit finally turning back on him. The moment I will never forget. Late afternoon on November 12th. Residents had already gone inside for dinner. I lingered in the courtyard a little longer. Ryan walked past thinking I didn't notice, but then slowed down and turned into the main hall. Curious, I stood and followed quietly. He stepped up to the large glass display case, the one holding firefighter photos. Veteran portraits. Old rescue tools. Harold Whitman's keepsakes. Ryan stood there for a long time. His hand rested on the glass as if asking it for permission. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the medal I had given him in Chapter 11. The Medal of Duty from 1998. My medal. Harold's memory. A lifetime of fire. Ryan didn't ask, didn't explain, didn't look for approval. He simply hung the medal in the center of the case between two photos of firefighters, exactly where it belonged. I stood behind him, silent. I didn't ruin the moment by stepping closer. He closed the case gently, took a slow breath, turned and saw me. He didn't speak. He only nodded. And I returned a small nod of my own, the kind of nod that says, "I see you now." In the reflection on the glass, I saw my own eyes, weathered, wrinkled, scarred by loss, but lighter than at any point in the past 2 years. If it were you, could you forgive a child who once abandoned you to a nursing home? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thank you for walking with me to the end of Douglas Kane's journey. This story was written to honor the parents, mothers, and fathers who loved, sacrificed, and were sometimes betrayed by those closest to them. Share this video so the story of honor can reach someone who needs it today.